So when you're looking at puzzles, one thing you want to, oh, there's Eugene. Okay. One thing you want to think about is always forcing moves. Right. So what is the number one forcing type of move in chess?
Threat of checkmate.
So threat to checkmate is actually, I would say, the second most forcing type in chess.
Okay.
I actually had a conversation about this a couple of weeks ago with one of my instructors, right? Because he said the same thing as you. And truth is, at least technically, right? If I threaten checkmate against you, do you have to defend against it? Technically, no. Right? Of course, in practice, yes.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so then it would have to be checked because you have to react to a check.
There we go. Right? Check is something you actually must react to. And there are actually some unique circumstances where I think that nuance actually comes into play. Right? Because, for instance, just 2 weeks ago, I remember I was analyzing a student's game, and there actually was a position where white played, get exactly what the move was, but he I think it was like queen g5, right, threatening checkmate. Okay, and he played like g6, right, defending against the mate threat, but he actually missed that there was a check, which was an intermezzo. Not every check, of course, is good, right? There are some good checks, there are some bad checks, right? If there's one common beginner mistake, actually, I see, right? It's that students will go for a check in every position, right? Like e4, d6, bishop b5, check. Oh my gosh, right? It's check. No, c6, bishop runs away, right? So it's not good, right? So there are actually some circumstances where that actually comes into play. So there are two types of moves in chess that you always want to consider. Not always do, but always consider: checks and captures. Okay. Great. So in this position, is white to play and win? Do either of you have any ideas? Right, so I'd look for checks. Okay, I don't see any checks.
Not seeing the position.
Oh,
I'm not seeing the position either.
My apologies. I do that way too often. It's like, why? Okay. Right, so there's no checks anyway, right? So yeah, what should white do here? Or white to play and win?
White to play and win.
I'll give you one small hint. Don't take what I said just a minute ago so literally.
Oh.
Because the truth is, this one is actually not that hard.
Well, that's bad news.
White plays bishop takes the pawn on c5.
Well, what's going to happen after bishop takes c5?
Then the rook can take the other bishop.
Okay, so for one, that's just a trade, right? But then, of course, black plays queen takes f2 check and has a very strong attack. Right? So, yeah, maybe not the best.
Okay, if the bishop moves to g5, attacking the queen takes the bishop, the rook takes the other bishop,
Okay, so that's a
It
trade.
winds up the same position. Yeah.
Right? But, however, right, you assume something. Stan, if bishop g5, what do you think black would do? Actually.
Yes.
Well, actually, you know what? I'm sorry. I messed up. That is what would happen. I thought for a second bishop g5, bishop takes h2 check would be played. But then, actually, it's not so good, actually, because king takes h2, queen takes g5, and rook takes d7. And you actually get both bishops. Right? So I mean, that's why it's so important to do blunder checks, right? I missed something actually relatively simple. Right? I was getting a little bit too fancy for my own good. Right? But yes, of course, bishop g5, queen takes g5, rook takes d6. Okay, bishop e6, right? And I think, black is kind of okay.
I keep looking at knight d5, but I can't get enough out of that.
Okay, so knight d5 attacks the queen. Okay. And yeah, like queen h4, right? Threatening, well, not completely checkmate, but a very strong mating attack. Right? And okay, I don't really see. I mean, yeah, you could defend against it, right? Play g3, but I don't see you're winning. So could you do something that maybe does just a little bit more than knight d5?
About knight e4, attacking the bishop and the queen.
Ah, okay. Does black have anything particularly good after that?
Well, from there, I don't know how he protects the bishop, because if he drops the queen back to e7, you still have knight takes or rook takes the bishop.
Right? So, yeah, right, that's actually just winning. Right? Knight e4 is just winning, I think. Right? Bishop takes h2 check, right? A desperado move. Right? And now king takes h2. Right? So the idea here is, right, whenever you can make one threat, right, try to make two threats, right? Because honestly, that was actually just a relatively simple fork, right? Which, by the way, is why I really like these Lichess puzzles, okay? Because they're very practical, right? If you look at a lot of, in fact, I'm gonna type in the chat right here a book recommendation. There's actually have either of you happened to heard of the book Sharpen Your Chess Tactics?
Vaguely.
I think it's actually just called Sharpen Your Tactics. It's a great book because it's kind of like the Lichess examples, right? Where it just says, white to play and move, black to play and move, right? It doesn't tell you, white to play and checkmate in 3 moves, or white to play and win a rook, right? Because that's not realistic. Right, so if you look at a puzzle like this, you're like, I don't even know if it's something simple like a fork, or I feel like, I might be wrong, but I feel like part of the reason it actually took a long time to figure out the answer to that question was you weren't looking for the simple fork.
Right.
Right? You were looking for, something crazy. And I will say, I was talking to a student last week. He's actually just after high school. He's actually on a gap year in Israel, and I don't know, I said that, but it doesn't make a difference. But his biggest problem was he kept looking for things that were just too like he was looking for the perfect win. Okay. And actually, Fabiano Caruana a couple weeks ago was doing actually a fundraiser lesson for this lady running for, I think, district attorney in New York. And the point is, he said one thing out of the whole lesson that I really, really remembered and really liked. Don't necessarily find the cleanest win all the time. Right? We get so boggled down that, you always are just, like being perfect, right? But sometimes you just need to trust yourself. And like in a similar note, for instance, actually one of my rabbis was doing a class 2 days ago, and he said, like, look, when you get engaged to someone, you're not going to know 100%, right? Is it going to work out? But you trust yourself. So, okay, so let's go back to this. Let's do one more warm-up puzzle while
What
we're
was
at
that book again? Sharpen Your Tactics by who?
it. It is by, no, I don't even. Yeah, let me see if I can pull it up here real quick.
Well,
This,
while I'm talking, I sent you an email. Last Sunday's New York Post had a picture of Cindy Crawford and her daughter playing chess.
oh yeah, sorry, I didn't get a chance to reply. I saw that. That was really cool. Yeah, I mean the amount of publicity that chess is getting these days is like absolutely amazing. This is the
Chess
book
and Cindy
here.
Crawford's gotta be some publicity.
And we're actually going to get an article in the New York Post ourselves a couple weeks from now. On March 3rd, we're actually, in case, by the way, you guys know of anyone, any Ivy alum, we're actually doing an all Ivy invitational tournament with the Columbia Club on March 3rd. And I actually have a friend who's a reporter in the Post who's already going to cover it, which is going to be great. So, but yeah, you could actually take the direct link there from the Zoom chat. It's Anatoly Lane, Art Chengaleski, and two more people. Just the editors. Yeah, so Lane and Art Chengaleski. Okay, so anyway, let's go back to this here. Okay, so what are some ideas here for black? Right, this is black to play and win.
I rather like knight d4.
Which knight to d4?
That's a good question. I'm trying to figure that out. But I think the knight at f5.
Okay, so knight fd4. Okay. So if knight fd4, let's say black plays knight takes d4.
Then knight takes d4, and you've got...
And then queen takes h5.
Whoops, wrong. Okay. Yep.
That would not be the best.
Is this white to move or black to move?
Black to move.
Well, what's wrong with if the knight takes the bishop?
Okay, so knight takes
c3.
e3, f takes e3. What's going to happen after that? Right, and remember one thing, right? In all of these puzzles, right, at least most of the time, right? If yes, it does say find the best move for black. That's true, right? But like really, I disagree with Lichess' description. Right? It's really find the best continuation for black until he gets a winning position. Right? Let me ask you, how do you define a winning position?
One that simplifies down to a one end game.
Be a little bit more specific. Right, because I'll give you an example, right? I showed a position before that, actually, I'm going to show you a little later, right after this. It's a good example of an endgame. Okay, and one side, I'm not going to ruin it for you because I'm going to ask you the question shortly, right? But one side is a little bit better in the position, right? And I gave the endgame to a different class, right? And a lot of the students said, black is winning, white is winning, right? I'm like, no, right? Like if anything, one side is better. Okay, I'm not going to tell you who, but one side is better. Okay, no one is winning, right? So to be very, very specific, okay, when I say black is winning, that means essentially, usually he's up at the very least a pawn, and most often, in particular in puzzles, okay, you're going to be up a piece or more. Or if anything, the exchange. Okay, the exchange or more. So, like, here's the thing, right? After knight takes e3, f takes e3, who do you think has a better position? After knight takes e3, f takes e3, who do you think has a better position?
Well, I think black has a better position.
Okay, right, but he's not winning. Right, that's what I'm getting at.
Right.
I agree. And by the way, I'm not even completely sure, right? Because, yeah, black has the initiative, white has an isolated e-pawn. But okay, white is up a pawn. Right? And my coach, Leonid Udasin, used to say something very simple all the time. Pawn is pawn. Right? You can't, underestimate that. Okay? But at the very least, okay, black is not winning. So, let's go back to the drawing board.
If black plays knight to g3 and the pawn takes the knight and then the rook takes the pawn, but then
okay, so, right, remember, right, we're always looking for checks and captures, right? So forget about the answer, okay? Like, what are some candidate moves here?
well, the knight to g3.
Right, it doesn't really do much, right? Because if knight g3 check, what would white do? What would white do if knight g3 check?
He's got to take with the pawn on the...
Right, f takes g3, right?
Yeah, f takes g3.
Okay, do you have any real follow-ups after that? I don't think so. Unless I'm missing something, but no. There's not. Right, you don't have any real follow-ups after that. So, what's another... So, right, there are two types of moves that you always want to, again, at the very least, consider. Right, so what's a good capture in this position? Or I should say, what's a capture in this position? Whether it looks good or bad at first. Don't overthink it. What's a capture in this position?
Well, rook captures at g2.
Okay,
Queen captures at f3.
Okay, right, and?
Rook captures at e3.
Right, okay, right, and then, okay, knight takes b4 and queen takes h2 check, but, right, clearly those aren't really such candidate moves. Right, just like queen takes f3 isn't, okay? But, let's look at rook takes e3. Okay, so on the surface, yeah, it's not such a great move, right? Because white's going to play f takes e3, and you lose the exchange, right? That's not a good thing. But what could maybe black do after that?
Oh, now after black takes the bishop, right? Then he has knight to g3, and that's check, and forks the queen,
Hmm.
and he can't take with the other pawn because he'd still be in check.
That's it. Right. That's it.
Right. That's it.
So,
Okay.
right. That's why it's extremely important. Okay. So consider, right, like forcing moves. Okay, but then also really consider the importance. Okay, of move order. Right. Like I can't tell you how many times students will lose a game just because they were like rushing a little bit and made an incorrect move order. Right, thinking, knight g3 check now, rook takes e3 now, etc. You know, it's all the same thing. But of course, it's not all the same thing. Right, rook takes e3 is actually, yeah, like completely winning, you know, for black. Right? I mean, he goes desperado, right? Queen takes e3, but it's actually the same thing, right? Because h takes, sorry, f takes, knight takes, right? Fork. Okay. So, since we're making good progress with puzzles, let's just do one more quick one here. And again, continue looking for forcing moves.
Hmm.
So, what's the number one forcing type of move in chess? What's the number one forcing type of move in chess?
Check.
Check. Okay. Good. Right. I was actually unsure for a second if you heard me or not.
Yeah, I had my mic on.
Yeah. No worries. Right. So, right. So, okay. So look for checks. Right. Yeah. And if they look good, if they look, because like here's the thing too. Right. Forget about the fact. Pretend this is not a puzzle for a minute. Right. And here's the thing. Right. I actually just thought of something important myself. Right. Which is like when you're doing these puzzles. Right. You should actually, for a second, right, forget about the fact that you're even doing a puzzle. Right? Meaning, like, think about it just as if you were playing a chess game, because that's really all it is. Right? It's a sample, you know, of a chess game where, yes, you do actually know that, you know, you have, like, some sort of winning continuation. Okay? So let's pull back for a second. Pretend this is not a puzzle, right? Pretend, right, the two of you, let's say, are teaming up against me, right? And I am playing black. Right? I just played rook e8. And the two of you are, you know, a team against me. Okay, great. So, right, I just made a move. The very first thing you need to do is write it down. Okay, rook e8. Right? And then you need to ask yourself why I went there. So why did I play rook e8? Right, so
You're attacking the
it
queen.
actually was this position, right? You played d3, okay, and I played rook e8. Why did I do that move?
You're attacking white's queen, and you have the threat of rook to e1 mate.
Right, okay, very good. So, yeah, right? So, in this position, right, think about it this way, right? Like, not only do you have to do forcing moves because you want to try to get a winning position, okay, you need to do forcing moves because you want to even stay. Yeah, right. You have to make forcing moves just because you want to stay alive, basically, right? In this particular case, right? If you don't make any, forcing moves here, well, you're just going to lose, right? Like if queen runs back to h3, let's say, okay, rook e1, back rank checkmate, right? And of course, if you just take on e8, okay, king takes e8, black is totally winning, okay? So that should actually narrow down your choices quite a bit.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is d7. If rook takes, pawn promotes.
Wait, sorry, queen what?
Pawn d7.
Okay, and then rook takes e6.
Oh, but the bishop controls the queen square. Never mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I keep looking at queen captures the rook at e8, but then I'm not sure where it goes.
Right, and you need a follow-up. Right, and one thing that's really, really, really important too is when you sacrifice, that's when you have something to prove. Right, so I was teaching an adult, very much beginner, the other day on Wednesday, and it was a very simple position where basically white in the opening played knight g5, and she said, "Oh, should I take the knight on g5? Should I play queen takes g5?" Okay, and I actually put the question right back at her, and I said, "Is there a reason you shouldn't take on g5?" And she got a little confused, like, what? Like, I just asked him a question, and you reversed the question on me, right? But I said, like, is there a reason you shouldn't take on g5? She was like, not that I see. Well, I said, look, it's a free piece, right? If you see, a free $5, right, and you can't think of a reason that you're not going to take that $5, like, of course you will, right? Just like a business deal, right? If it's a good deal and you don't see a reason not to, like, wow, it's free money. Okay, so because of that, right? When you sacrifice, on the other hand of the spectrum, right? When you sacrifice, it's you who has something to prove, right? Just like even when you make a pawn move, right? A pawn move doesn't go backwards, right? When you make a pawn move, put it this way, it almost is like a mini sacrifice, right? Because you're losing, okay, some chances to move your pawns again, right? So actually, in a way, it's kind of like a little bit of a sacrifice, right? So you actually have something to prove. Okay, when you sacrifice, your opponent is trying to just, protect himself, right? But it's you who has something, okay, to prove. Okay. So anyway,
how about queen takes bishop?
Okay, queen takes f6 check. Okay, what is black going to do?
Pawn takes. And
okay, g takes f6. Yeah.
Bishop captures at h6 check.
Is that just check, or is that something else?
Looks like mate.
There you go. There's your answer. Well, okay, knight of 7's another move, but yeah, queen takes mate.
Right.
So, okay. Let me ask you guys, is there something, you would say you've learned from doing all those puzzles?
Start looking at more possibilities.
Right. Well, there's a couple of things. Right. One, ideally, I highly recommend that both of you do at least 5 puzzles a day. You know, like, because it really is just like repetition, right? Like, for instance, I saw this next puzzle up here, okay, and I honestly like found the answer in like 10 seconds. Okay, like the complete solution. Not because like I'm a genius, but because I've seen a bunch of puzzles like this before. So, you know what? Let's do this. One more, and then we'll go to this like instructive endgame. Because these puzzles, like you're starting to see, right? There's repetition. There's forcing moves. Okay, so what are the 2 forcing moves? Eugene, tell me one. Stan, tell me the other one. Just there are 2 forcing moves in this position. 2
This
moves.
is light supply.
Yeah.
Bishop to H7 check.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the other one, Stan?
Rook captures at G7 check.
Right. Rook takes G7 check. Okay. Great. So Rook takes G7 check. King takes G7. Is there any real good follow up to that?
Not immediately.
I don't think so. Right. And remember, right? It's you who has this something to prove, right? You just gave away a full rook. Right? If I spent $1,000 like on an ad, right? I'm only doing it if I know, okay, that there is going to be like something immediate, right? If I just say like, okay, I may or may not get something, okay, it probably wouldn't be like sensible for me to do that. Okay, so that's the idea. Okay, so now Bishop H7 check. Okay, what is Black going to do?
Black, let's see.
I think you should take with the knight.
I think he has to
Correct.
take with the knight.
Right,
Yeah,
because, right, let's say he doesn't, right, just to be extra sure, right, because that's actually one common mistake, right? Often we assume that our opponent has to capture, which, of course, is not always true, right? So Bishop H7 check, right, King H8, what would White do?
Well, with King H8, then you have Knight F7.
Checkmate. Right?
Right.
Okay,
Right.
good. So, but again, I'm just, walking you through the thought process because this is, an easy time where, students, often make mistakes, right? Because they assume things are forced that are actually not forced. Okay, and that happens all the time with captures. Okay, so Bishop H7 check. Okay, he is going to play Knight takes H7. Okay, how do you continue being forcing?
Now, Rook takes at G7.
Okay. So King takes G7. How are you going to continue being forcing?
Queen G6 check.
Okay, good. And what is Black going to do after that?
Good question.
Well, he has 2 options. What are they?
One option is H8.
Right, King H8. Okay. And then what are you going to do?
You're gonna play the Knight F7 mate.
7 mate? Okay. So, if King H8, Knight F7 mate, what
Right.
about if King F8?
Then you have queen to f7 mate.
Awesome. Right? Exactly. Right. So honestly, that was harder. You know, but you honestly, it's actually kind of interesting, right? For the first puzzle that we did was actually like I would say a substantially easier question. It took you a lot longer to solve. Right? This was like relatively like I think much easier actually. But it took a lot longer, right? So yeah, checkmate 1, right? Forced. 2, okay, forced. 3, okay, and 4. All right, very good. Okay, so let's go into study. And I wanted to talk to you guys about a very practical endgame study that I've been reviewing a fair amount with students recently. I just need to find it here real quick. Excuse me. Something called Nolan Study. Oh, here it is. Okay, great. And I'm gonna go to chapter 49. Okay, so this is from a game that was played in the World Disabled Olympiad back in October. White was this guy from Ireland. I don't know his name offhand. And black was actually this guy named Michael Aigner, a friend of mine from Chicago. Not from Chicago. We played in the Chicago Open in 2009, but he's from California. And yeah, he was actually on my podcast a couple months ago as well. But I really did. This game was in this issue of Chess Life actually, and I really did enjoy like going through this game. So it's white to move, right? And the first thing you really need to do in any endgame is evaluate, right? Just take stock of the position, figure out who's better, by how much, and why. So, what do you think? Who's better, how much, and why?
Well, nominally, black should have a slight advantage with the bishop-knight pair, although I don't know whether that applies in this position.
Now, I don't think it applies because the bishop's on a dark square and it pretty much can't do anything.
So, here's the thing, right? The bishop and knight pair is not exactly a thing. The two bishops is a thing, right? Okay. So in general, two bishops are, yes, better than a bishop and a knight, right? And there's a reason for that, right? A knight is better than a bishop in general. Why? Because it controls all 64 squares. Okay, a knight is worse than a bishop because a bishop is a long-range piece. Okay, but when you get the two bishops, you kind of get the best of both worlds, right? They're both long-range pieces still. That doesn't change. And together, they do control the whole board, right? So it just kind of changes things a little bit. Why? Because in that particular case, okay, you get the advantage of the bishops being long-range pieces, and together they actually do control the whole board, right? So the advantage of the knight basically goes away, right? So, okay, wonderful. So, in this position, black is actually a little bit better, but do you have any idea why that actually is? So it has to do with the fact that the bishop on d8 is on the opposite color as all of his pawns and on the same color as all of white's pawns. Okay, so when you are in an endgame, okay, and have bishops, you always want your bishop to be on the opposite color of your pawns and the same color as your opponent's pawns, right? Especially in this case, when white has a pawn on f2 that is called a backward pawn, right? It might not seem like such an issue now, right? Because black's pieces are all the way here, but that's not to say that that's going to be permanent. So Bill Lombardi was a friend and mentor of mine. He was Bobby Fischer's second. I probably mentioned to him before. But one of his important lessons to me was you should always think about your dream squares for your pieces, right? If you could take your piece and put them anywhere on the board you want, where would that actually be? Okay, so that knight on d7, if you could just place it anywhere on the board you want in one move, where would that be?
The black bishop, it would be e1.
Okay, the bishop will go to e1. Correct.
That would be the dream square.
For the bishop. I agree. Okay, how about the knight, Phil? Right, which is good. You just answered my next question.
Black knight.
G4.
The G4 is the second best. Where else could it go that's even better? Again, I'm asking about your dream square, right? I'm not asking about good. You know, I'm asking about utopia.
It would be d3.
D3, correct. Okay, great. So, what should black do now? If he wants to get that.
Oh, he has to hop back to the 8th rank and come out to E6.
Well,
no, that doesn't work either.
Well, I think the first thing perhaps would be to move bishop a5, which basically attacks both knights and forces one to defend the other, which is going to tie them up.
Exactly.
Allowing his knight freedom to move.
Exactly. Okay, so black wants to play, okay, bishop a5. What should white do? Well, black wants to play bishop a5, so what could white do about that?
To prevent it would be...
right, assuming it's a concern to you, which I think it's a valid concern.
You'd play knight b3.
Exactly. Okay, great. Right, knight b3. Okay, so now... what should black do? Right, so you can't play bishop a5, but what else are you trying to do in this position with regard to dream squares?
Well, you're trying to get the knight to d3. Bum, bum, bum.
So, how did we get there?
That's what I'm looking for. You'd have to bring the knight back to, unless I'm missing something, you'd have to bring the knight back to b8.
Okay, there you go. Knight b8.
Yeah,
Right, so this whole lesson, okay, is about the idea of planning in the end game. Right, you always need to have a plan in the end game. Right, if you're going to try to win. Right, otherwise, you're not going to make progress. Okay, great. So knight b8, king g2, right? Active king in the endgame. King f6, okay? Black continues with his plan, right? Get to his active square. Okay, knight f4, knight takes. Now, how should white capture back?
Well, if you capture with the G pawn, then the backward pawn is still protected by the king. If you capture with the E pawn, then you've got now two separate chains, and the backward pawn at D4 is no longer protected by the king, although it's protected by the knight. Good question.
So, here's the thing. Right, king takes f4 is the worst option. Why? Because now this pawn on g3 is isolated. Okay, and this pawn on e3 is backward. Okay, g takes f4 would actually be the best option, because then white has one pawn chain. Now, in the game, white played e takes f4, right, which was not the best move. And part of the reason he made that move, according to the article, is white was in a position, given the team, where it was kind of like all or nothing. You know, he needed to, like, basically, there are sometimes in a team tournament, right, where you're paired as a team, actually, and basically a draw will be the same thing as a loss. Right, and that happens, of course, in regular tournaments too, right? If you're, half a point behind first place, well, sometimes there'll be times where, a draw gets you no money or very little money, and a win will get you, a lot of money. So, the point here is this created a little bit more dynamic in the position, as white has ideas like knight d2, knight f1, knight e3, and g4, and start pushing his pawn. Okay, so let's see what happened in the game. Bishop c7, knight c1, and bishop a5, coming around the mountain, to the backward pawn. Okay. Knight d3, bishop d8. That was honestly, I think, just like a little bit of a waiting move. Maybe at this point they were eyeing around time control, right? Where, every single move you get an increment. Again, I don't know. That's like my rationale. King e3. White plays this interesting idea of g5. I mean, this is called a lever. Okay, he wants to bring his knight to e5. He can't do that now, of course, right? F takes e5. So he plays g5 to try to kind of pry the square open, right? By trying to get him to play either f5 or f takes g5, or he'll be able to come in. Okay, so takes. Okay, great. what should black do in this position?
My first inclination is knight e5, forking the two pawns.
Right, he wants to play
then
95. Okay, good. So, in this position, right, there's a couple candidate moves. Right, so it always comes down to thought process. Right, if white had another move, yes, it's very clear. Right, he'll play 95, forking the pawns. Right, so that means black has, I would say, like a couple ideas. Right, black has to be very careful. Right, we did say in the beginning of this that, you know, black is better, okay, but that doesn't mean that black can't lose, right? I've you know, even had many losing positions that, you know, became wins. So the idea here is, right, that there's like 3 moves that I would think about here. What are the 3 moves to think about here?
For white?
No, it's black to move.
Black to move.
Black's move king to f5.
Sorry?
If it's black to move, king to f5.
Right, so yeah, right. So king f5 is one candidate move. Okay, right? Counterplay. What's another candidate move? Right, bishop c7, right? Stop knight e5. Okay. And lastly, the move that he did in the game, which is bishop d8. Right, because now let's look at them in more detail. Right, like bishop c7 looks good, right? Because you're preventing counterplay. But now, I think what's going to happen is white's going to play knight b4, attacking this pawn. So black has to play king d7. And now, okay, white plays like king f3. And, you know, the truth is, I think white is, like, not doing great, but, like, yeah, like, yeah. So, okay. So that's why, right? And if king f5, yeah, knight e5 would actually be winning, right? Because here's the problem. White has connected pass pawns, and black has only one pawn on g6 that's not connected, okay? And it's like way far back, right? So basically, yeah, like black is in a lot of trouble here, right? Because of all of that. So, okay. That's why bishop d8 happened in the game. King f4, okay, king g4, bishop h2. Important move, right? Trying to get the bishop behind the backward pawn. Okay, knight e1, knight f3. Now, where should black go here?
Oh. Black should probably do a delaying move and move the bishop to f2.
So there's 2 options. Right, bishop f2 and bishop e3. So why bishop f2 over e3?
Because the knight the knight has to move to a dark square, so it can't be attacking that dark square for 2 moves. Because it's got to go dark, light to attack it.
Okay. But what does the bishop do on e3 that it doesn't do on f2?
Oh, it attacks the pawn on g5.
It
Oh,
attacks
it's
the pawn on
attacking.
g5, and it also forces a move out of white that is going to deteriorate his position.
Okay. So let me ask you a question. Is there anything in particular that the bishop does on f2 that it doesn't do on e3?
It keeps the knight off of h4. But that doesn't seem to be
Right, so basically not so much.
right.
Right, basically not so much. Because guess what? Bishop e3. Actually, sorry, I'm going to actually answer in a different way. That's not an advantage. Because guess what? Bishop e3 also stops knight h4. Right, because bishop takes d4, knight takes c6, bishop takes c5. Right, so actually, no, there's a lot of things that bishop e3 does that bishop f2 doesn't do. Right, so one question I've been actually asking a lot of students the last couple of days is actually a very simple one. Why do better chess players beat weaker chess players in general? No, seriously, and not even as a joke, right? If you had to summarize in one sentence why stronger chess players will beat lower-rated chess players, why?
Because their moves accomplish more with less.
Right, on the whole. Right, I've had many students over the last couple of days, of all levels, by the way, tell me, right, it's because, like, weaker chess players are going to make more mistakes. That's not necessarily true. Right, because I want you to think about, let's say, Grandmaster Mark Paragua, who's on our team. He teaches our adult advanced class on Tuesday nights. Right, let's say he's playing against Magnus Carlsen. Okay, Paragua's not going to make any, like, massive mistakes. Okay, he's a very strong grandmaster. You know, he led the Filipino team in the Olympiad. Right, very strong. Okay, but compared to Carlsen, like Carlsen on the whole is going to make a lot better moves. Like just on average. Right, and he's going to outplay Paragua. Right, and I could even say the same thing about like Carlsen and, you know, one of the elite who's just not Carlsen's level. Right, like, you know, Nakamura. Okay, on the whole, right, Carlsen is going to beat Nakamura more. Why? Because he's just on the whole going to make better moves. Right, so it's a lot of these nuances. Right, like yeah, bishop f2, bishop e3, like they look almost equal to each other. Right, but bishop e3 is that hair better. Now, if you played bishop f2, would I go ahead and say that's a mistake? Not necessarily. Right, if I want to be like really technical, I might say that's a mistake. Right, but bishop e3 is of course better. Now, knight e5, bishop takes d4. Now white actually made a legitimate mistake. Knight takes g6, he would have actually held his own. Okay, black is actually, of course, better here, but it's not the end of the story, right? Because white's pawn is actually far enough to get a drawn position. So, okay. So, instead, white actually did make a mistake by playing knight takes c6. And here, black won, right? Because the knight was trapped. So, what do we get out of this endgame? Okay, creating a plan is very important, right? Really important to evaluate the position and accordingly come up with the best plan. Okay, and last but not least, right, you always want to try to find your dream squares. Okay. Well, thank you guys. See you next week. And yeah, I would definitely encourage you if you have some time just to play like a game or two, throughout the week. And I'd be happy to try to take a look at some of it.
Thanks. Take
All
care.
right. Take care, everyone.
Okay. So,
Hello, this is Evan.
Hi, Evan and Hassel. How are you?
Good.
Happy news.
Good. Yeah, I was about to call you. I know you called like a minute earlier. I was finishing another meeting, but no, I'm good.
Oh, okay. I think I'll try it again. You never know with the technology. I'm fascinated with your concepts of your business, so I wanted to follow up with you. I know people who are into sports, and to me, chess is a sport. It's not physical, but you have to work at it. And so I sent your name to a group of people I know in Manhattan called My Networking Group. Have you heard of this group?
I have not.
MNG. They're a bunch of business professionals, and I was a member with them for about 10 years. And I gave it up because I hurt my leg, and I was having trouble getting up and down the stairs in Manhattan anymore. So I very reluctantly gave it up. But these guys love to play games and sports, and I put your name out to them. You might be hearing from some of the people. I just love that idea that you can do critical thinking through chess.